Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel Am Yis Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Tzadik Vav Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today, second line down in the Shulchan Aruch on Daf Tzadik Vav Amud Beis, Siman Shin Hey Sif Yud Ches. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanesuna Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayamu Bein Bayabasha, Hamakam Yerachem Alehem, V'Yitzei Mitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'Oro Mishibud L'Geula, Hashta B'Agala U'Bizman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema from Shemer ben Esther Fradel, Tzvi ben Leah Miriam, Chav Hadassah bas Rezel Serel, Dvara bas Shoshabina, Rivka bas Shiralea, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha. They should have a Refuah Shalema b'Seich Shar Chayle Yisrael. Our learning should also be a schus for Yonasan ben Michal and Yoel ben Michal. You may remember those names. I had been mentioning them for quite a long time. They're relatives of mine who are in the IDF, who are now being reposted back to the front. I think this might be their fifth tour in action. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over them together with all of our other brothers and sisters that find themselves in harm's way. One thing that was pointed out to me by relatives of mine in Eretz Yisrael is that people listen to the stories coming out of Eretz Yisrael, and people kind of, when something really terrible happens, somebody really gets hurt, chas v'chalila badly, so people recognize right away, wow, it's terrible, it's awful. But all of the ancillary things that are going on in Eretz Yisrael, because of the matziv over there, people who are removed from it don't necessarily really chap all of the difficulties involved. So just to give you an example, what this relative of mine told me is you have to realize that young men that are in the miluim, in the reserves, who can, constantly be called up and they go in for several months and then they're let out and then they go back and then they go out, they can't have jobs because you can't hold down a job. How can you hold down a job? If you're going to get a phone call, it's time to come back in. Girls that want to get married, how could people get married? Young men don't want to get married because they don't want to get married when they're in that position, when at any time they could be called up to the reserves and be sent to the front lines. So to a large extent, there's a whole generation that has their lives on hold since October 7th. So it's just, there's so much difficulty and so much struggle and so much challenge. And it's something that we have to bear in mind. Especially here in Chutz La'aretz, you feel somewhat removed from it, or maybe very removed from it. And it starts to become old hat also. This is something that we're talking about, already for, a year and a half. It's an ongoing struggle and an ongoing challenge, and we need to be mispaled to the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom should please bring an end to this bitter gullus. The Rebbeinu Shalom should just bring Mashiach Tzidkenu, and we shouldn't know from any of these things anymore. Okay, now Nachzor Le'inyoneinu Siman Shin Hey Sif Yud Ches, says the Mechaber, Ein Roichven Al Gabe Behema. So this is something that's going to come up a lot in Hilchos Shabbos, and here you have the source right here. Ein roichven al gabe behema. You're not allowed to ride on an animal on Shabbos. Not only are you not allowed to ride an animal on Shabbos, v'loy nislim aleha. You're not allowed to hang off of an animal on Shabbos. Va'afilu b'tzida aser lehishtamish. You're also not allowed to make use of an animal's side. So you're not allowed to lean against the animal on Shabbos. Aval tzideit stadin, but to be twice removed from the animal. So let's be clear about this. The ikar halacha, the ikar din derabanan, is you're not allowed to ride on the animal. You're not allowed to be on the animal. And the reason for this is Gzeira D'Rabbanan. We're afraid that if you would be allowed to ride an animal on Shabbos, you might come to break a branch off of a tree, to use it as a switch, to use it as something to hit the animal, to make the animal go. Now that would be an Issa D'Oraisa, to break off the branch off the tree. That's the ikar reason why the Chachamim made Gzeira that you're not allowed to ride on an animal on Shabbos. So the ikar din D'Rabbanan is to make use of the top of the animal to put your body on the animal. That's derech rechiva. That's the normal way of riding animal. But the Chazal also asered to be mishtamish with the tzodim of the animal. That's what the Mechaber says here. Va'afilu b'tzida aser lehishtamish. You're not even allowed to make use of the side of the animal. So to lean on the animal, that Chazal also asered, even though that's sort of one step removed from riding on the animal. Now you're not on top of the animal. You're not making use. You're not putting your body on the animal. Now you're standing on the ground. You're leaning on the animal. You're making use of the side of the animal. Chazal answered that as well. Alvol tzidate studin, but to be twice removed. So to use the side of something that is resting on the side of the animal, that is mutter. And the Mechaber explains this. He says, Kigoin. For example, shedavar echad munach al tzida. Let's say there's something that's leaning on the animal. V'hu mishtamish boy. And you're going to make use of the item that's leaning on the animal. That is mutter. So we have over here, we have the first halach is, you're not allowed to ride on the animal. You're not allowed to hang on the animal, hang off the top of the animal. That's din number one. Din number two, the Chazal expanded this, and they said you're not even allowed to make use of the side of the animal. What does that mean? You can't lean on the animal. Then what's mutter is tzidate studin. If you're making use of something that is leaning on the animal, that is mutter. Take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Samachalo says the Chavetz Chaim, Ein Reichvin. Why can't you ride an animal on Shabbos? What's wrong with riding an animal on Shabbos? Gzeira, this is a Gzeira d'Rabbanan, Shema Yachtoich Zemoira Min HaMechuber. Chazal were afraid that you might come to go break off a branch from a tree. You might break off a branch that's connected to the ground, kedei lahanhiga, in order to use it as a switch to hit the animal, to make the animal go. The chayav alzeh mishum toilish, that would be an issa daraisa of toilish to toilada de koitzer, which is a toilda of the av malach of koitzer, of harvesting. You're not allowed to hang off an animal. The kol shimush b'balachayim kalalu b'chlal rechiva va'asru, because any type of using an animal, so riding it, hanging on it, the Chachamim included all of that under the rubric of rechiva, of riding the animal, and they asked it. Now, what if there's no room for a concern that you might come to break off a branch and use it as a switch? For example, Kigain, for example, says the Chavetz Chaim, Bamidbar. You're in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and you want to ride on a camel. Now, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, there's no fear that you might come to break off a branch off a tree and use it as a switch, because there's no tree for 1,000 miles in any direction. So, okay, so l'chayre, there's no concern. Still, says the Mishnah Berurah, oh, you're another case where you would think there's no concern that Shem Yachtach Zmoira. Oh, l'shav shefes atinoik al gabe abehema. You're playing with a kid, and what you want to do is you want to use the animal as a toy. Literally, as a playground. Literally, what the words mean over here is l'shavshef es atinoik, to rub a child al gav habehema, on the back of the animal, kedei l'shasheya, in order to play with the animal, with the child. So you're using, I don't know, maybe you have a camel, right? The camel has humps, and you're sliding the kid down the humps, or maybe the behema is resting on its back. It's like crouched down, so there's a slope on the back of the animal. So you'll use the back of the animal like a sliding pond. You're not allowed to do that either. Gamkein Aser, even though over there, why would you break off a branch to use it as a switch? You don't want to make the animal go. You're not looking to go. You're not looking to travel. You're just playing on the back of the animal. Still, it's Aser, Gamkein Aser. Why? Delay plug Rabbanan b'mil sayu. Because when the Chachamim made these gzeras, they didn't go ahead and start writing rule books and saying, our gzera applies in this case, in that case, not in this case, not in that case. They made a gzera. You're not allowed to be mishtamish b'bal chai. You're not allowed to do anything that falls under the rubric of rechiva. What does that mean? You're not allowed to go on the animal. You're not allowed to lean on. You're not allowed to hang on the animal. That's all usher under the rubric of rechiva, even if the real concern of the gzera, shem yachtach zmoira, even if that real concern doesn't apply, still in all, it remains usher. Ois cotton samach gimel, the Mechaber said, you're also not allowed to use the side of the animal. So that means you're not allowed to lean on the animal. But tzidei studin, to use the side of something that's using the side of the animal, that's mutter. You're twice removed, that's mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah like this. Hainu. What does this mean? That you're allowed to use tzidei studin? Hainu, shesoimech es atzmai bitzad oisai davar. You're going to lean on something that is leaning on the animal. So you have an item that's being supported by the animal. So in my mind, I'm just imagining, let's say you have a ladder, right? And the bottom of the ladder is resting on the ground, but the side of the ladder is resting against a horse. So what's holding the ladder up? The animal is holding the ladder up. But what part of the animal? The side of the animal. The ladder is leaning on the side of the animal. So the ladder is al tzidei habehema. The ladder is resting on the side of the animal. Now, you want to go lean against the ladder. So you're not leaning on the side of the animal. You're leaning on the ladder. The ladder is leaning on the side of the animal. So that's twice removed. That's tzidei studin. If you would lean on the animal, you're using the tzad, the side of the animal. That's also. But if there's a ladder leaning on the animal, and now you lean on the ladder, you're using tzidei studin. You're using the side of something which is resting on the side of the animal. So you're twice removed, tzidei studin, that the Mechaber said is mutter. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says a fascinating thing, which he's taking from a Magen Avram. Realize, and really, and the Magen Avram is taking it from a Ran. The words over here in the Mechaber are very, very meduyik. It says over here, tzidei studin, to use the side of something which is resting on the side of the animal. That's what's mutter. But how about if you don't use the side of something that's using the side of the animal? How about if you use the top of something that's using the side of the animal? The Ran, the Lashon of the Ran in Masechta Shabbos is very meduyik. The Lashon of the Ran is that you're allowed to use the side of something that's resting on the side of the animal. So the Magen Avram is medayik from this Ran and says, but to use the top of something that's resting on the side of the animal, that's not mutter. So let's take a look what the Mishnah Berurah says here. Avo, im mishtamish al gav oisai davar hamunach al tzida. But if you want to make use of the top of an item that's resting on the side of the animal, that's usher. Harehu kimishtamish al tzida mamish, that is akin to using the side of the animal. And that would be usher. And we're going to see this in the Ramah very shortly, where the Ramah is going to say a halacha that if there's an animal and there's a wagon that's hitched to the animal. Now, when a wagon is hitched to the animal, the wagon is not on top of the animal. The wagon is somehow affixed to a different part of the body of the animal. So it's really tzidei habehema. So the wagon is really something that is right? That would be like the ladder that's leaning on the side of the animal. Right? The wagon is also like leaning, it's on the side of the animal. It's attached to the sides of the animal. So that's studin. So now, how about if you want to climb up and you want to go in the wagon? Is that tzidei studin? Again, a ladder is leaning on an animal, and now you lean on the ladder. We said that's tzidei studin, and that's mutter. Okay, now we're going to replace the ladder with a wagon. A wagon is hitched to the side of the animal. Now, the side doesn't mean literally the side, that somehow it's attached to the side of the animal. It means that it's not affixed to the top. The wagon is not on top of the animal. The wagon is hitched somehow to the animal. But that's called studding. It's affixed to the side of the animal, right? So take out ladder, put in wagon. Are you allowed to now climb up on the wagon and call that tzidei studding? The Ramah says no. The Ramah says going on the wagon is called that you're using the tzidei habehema. That's not called tzidei studding. So that's why the Mishnah Berurah says over here, this din of the Ramah is not only a wagon. This din of the Ramah would be the same din. Anything that's leaning on the animal, if you want to climb up on top of it, that's not called tzidei studding. That's not called using the side of something that's resting on the side of the animal. That's using the top of something that's leaning on the side of the animal. And from the Ran, you see that that's not mutter. From the Ran, you see that the only thing that's mutter is when you are resting on the side of something that's using the side of the animal. But to use the top of something that's using the side of the animal, that is usher. Now we're going to have to discuss why it is that way, but let's wait till we get to the Ramah. Ayin Sham Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Samach Zayin. Okay, now let's break for a second and see a different halacha. Let's go back into the Mechaber over here. It says the Mechaber, 4 lines down the middle of the line. So you're not allowed to go up on an animal on Shabbos. What happens if you did? Vim Allah aleha, if you climbed up on top of an animal on Shabbos, afilu b'mezid. Even if you did this b'mezid, you did it intentionally. You knew that today was Shabbos. You knew that it's usher to go up on an animal on Shabbos. It is to Rabbanan, and you went ahead and you did it anyway. Vim Allah aleha, if somebody went on an animal on Shabbos, afilu b'mezid, even if he did it b'mezid, Yered, he's still allowed to go down. Now the afilu over here is because that's not the halacha by a tree. We're going to see you're also not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. If you climb a tree on Shabbos b'mezid, guess what? You're stuck in that tree. You're not allowed to come down off the tree until after Shabbos. That's it. You climbed up a tree b'mezid on Shabbos, knowing that it's an Issa D'Rabbanan. The Chacham gave you a knas. You're going to stay in that tree until Shabbos is over. Not so by an animal. By an animal, if you climbed up on an animal on Shabbos b'mezid, you're allowed to climb down. Why? Says the Mechaber. Vim Allah aleha afilu b'mezid. If you climbed up on an animal on Shabbos, even if you did it b'mezid, yered, you could come down. Why? Mishum tsar balei chayim. Because there's a din daraisa of Tsar Balei Chayim. How do we know there's a din daraisa of Tsar Balei Chayim? Because the Torah Dirshu gives us a mitzvah. The Torah Dirshu says that if you see somebody traveling with an animal and the animal is collapsing under its load, you have a mitzvah of prika. You have a mitzvah to go help unload the animal. Why? Because the animal is suffering. So you have a mitzvah daraisa to help alleviate the suffering of the animal. So you see Tsar Balei Chayim as a din daraisa. So said the Chachamim, you were over an Issa D'Rabbanan b'mezid, and you climbed up on an animal on Shabbos b'mezid, but over here we're not going to give you a knas and tell you that you have to stay on the animal to lift the Shabbos, because you're causing the animal Tsar Balei Chayim, which is an Issa D'Oraisa, therefore you're going to climb down. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Samach Daled, Afilu b'mezid yered, v'loi k'moi gabe ilan. Over here the halacha is not the same as it is when somebody climbs a tree. Dim Allah b'mezid, that if somebody climbs a tree on Shabbos b'mezid, kaima lo l'kamon b'simin shin lamud vav sif aleph, we paskin in simin shin lamud vav sif aleph, the lo yered on Motzei Shabbos, that he's not allowed to come down until Motzei Shabbos mishum knosa, because the Chazal give him a penalty. Halacha over here by the animal yered mishum tsar Balei Chayim. Okay, next halacha says the Mechaber, umitam zeh. This gets a bit complicated. Umitam zeh, based on this same rationale, based on this din of Tsar Balei Chayim and the need to alleviate the suffering of an animal, umitam zeh, parkid masui she'aleha, you're allowed to unload a burden from an animal on Shabbos, and now interject, read between the lines, even if the load that's on the if the load that's on the animal is muktzah. So if you have an animal on Shabbos that has a very heavy load on it, and the animal is suffering from bearing this load, and if you don't unload it, it's going to have to bear this load until after Shabbos, you're allowed to unload it, even if the items that are on the animal are muktzah. They're things that have absolutely no Shabbos use, so they're mamish muktzah. You're still allowed to unload it. Why are you allowed to unload it? Because muktzah is an issa d'Rabbanan. Tzar Baalei Chayim is an issa d'Oraisa. So in order to facilitate alleviating the suffering of the animal, which is a requirement midaraisa, we're going to relax the issa d'Rabbanan of muktzah, and we're going to allow you to unload the animal. Now, says the Mechaber, Ketzad oisa, but what should you do? How should you unload the animal? So again, you have this case, you have an animal on Shabbos bearing a heavy load of muktzah items, and we're telling you that in order to alleviate the suffering of the animal, we're going to relax the Isra of muktzah, and we're going to allow you to unload the animal. But Ketzad oisa, but exactly how should you do this? Says the Mechaber, what you should do is, Machnis roishoy tachas hamasui, use your head. Stick your head under the animal's burden, umisalkoi litzat acher, use your head to push the load to one side of the animal, v'hu noifel me'elov, and the load will fall off by itself. Now, if you notice, I put a lot of extra words, kind of, into the words of the Mechaber that the Mechaber doesn't really say. So first of all, the Mechaber doesn't say a word over here about muktzah. The Mechaber never makes the point here that we're dealing with muktzah. But obviously we're dealing with muktzah, because otherwise, why is the Mechaber telling you that you should use your head, right? You should use your head. Now, the other thing I told you is that you can do this, the Mechaber says, because of Tzar Baalei Chayim. Umitam zeh. Because of Tzar Baalei Chayim, that's why we're being matir this. We're being matir this because of Tzar Baalei Chayim. Well, what is there to be matir? What we're being matir is muktzah. That's the thing that we have to be matir. Because of Tzar Baalei Chayim, which is a daraisa, we're going to be matir the issa d'Rabbanan of muktzah. But at the same time that we're going to be matir the issa d'Rabbanan of muktzah, we're not going to jump right away and tell you, even though the items on top of the animal are muktzah, you should go run and you should use your hands and you should handle the muktzah biyadayim mamish. Instead, we're going to tell you, use your head. Use tiltal begufay. Use your body. Use your head to move the muktzah, which is moving the muktzah in an unusual way. To go handle it mamish with your hands, we don't want to run to be matir that. Now, what if you can't do it with your head? What if the mitzias is that the only way you could unload the animal is to use your hands? Well, then the halacha is that you're going to use your hands. Now, the Mechaber doesn't speak it out over here, but let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, for this reason of Tzar Baalei Chayim, you're allowed to unload an animal. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's going on here? Hainu, afilu hamasi hu muktzah. What the Mechaber is telling you is, because of Tzar Baalei Chayim, you're allowed to unload an animal from its heavy load, even if the load is muktzah. That's what we're being matir. Nevertheless, but we're not going to run and tell you that you could go unload the animal and handle the muktzah biyadayim mamish because of Tzar Baalei Chayim, because it's possible to do it without doing it directly with your hands. It's possible to do it with your head. But what if you can't? Well, if you can't do it with your head, then the halacha is that you're allowed to do it even with your hands, mamish. Now, we could see this really in the Bir Halacha also. So take a look at the Bir Halacha. Dibra maschel umitam zeh. For this reason, Tzar Baalei Chayim, you're allowed to go unload the animal. And how should you unload the animal? By using your head. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Bir Halacha. Kol zeh isa b'Rambam perek chaf aleph halacha tes and yud. All of this comes directly from the Rambam, perek chaf aleph, Hilchos Shabbos, perek chaf aleph, halacha tes and yud. V'chein batur, and the Torah quotes it. Now, v'hinei. Says, very strange, the Chavetz Chaim says. L'charid is a bomb kasha on this. V'hinei, lefi masha paisik ha-mechaber l'kamon b'simin shin yod aleph sifches ka'rosh. The mechaber paskins in shin yod aleph, like the shitas harosh, the tiltel begufo ishari b'chol gavni. What are you doing over here? You're moving muktzah using your head. Or you're moving muktzah using another part of your body. But you're not moving the muktzah with your hands. You're moving the muktzah with your body. Now, the mechaber paskins in shin yod aleph, that to move muktzah with your body is mutter. You don't need tsar balakayim in order for it to be mutter. The mechaber paskins, it's always mutter to move muktzah with your body. You have something muktzah on Shabbos that you need to move out of the way, and you want to take your head, and you want to push it away with your head, that's muktzah. You don't need the extenuating circumstance of tsar balakayim to make that mutter. So asks the Chavetz Chaim in Cain, I feel a belois far as tsar balakayim hayolot lahater lahachtis roishay tachtein. So the Chavetz Chaim is asking, I don't understand this halacha of the mechaber. Comes along the mechaber, and the mechaber says, I just told you what an interesting halacha. If somebody climbs up on a behema on Shabbos, even if he did it b'mezid, he's allowed to come off of the behema. We're not going to give him a knas and tell him he has to stay on the behema for the rest of Shabbos. Why? Because of tsar balakayim. Now the mechaber comes and he tells you zaytaka halacha. Because we mentioned tsar balakayim, I'm telling you another interesting heter that comes from tsar balakayim. What's that? An animal is loaded with a heavy load of muktzah items. You could go unload the animal using your head. I don't need tsar balakayim to be matter that. It's always mutter to move muktzah with your head. So what do I got to come on to tsar balakayim over here? That's the kasha that the Chavetz Chaim asks here. Now, if you skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 lines over here in the Bir Halacha, says the Bir Halacha, V'hama'ayin barambam, but if you look at the Rambam, Shemimenu noivim elu advarim, these words are all flowing out of the words of the Rambam. Says the Chavetz Chaim, if you actually look at the Rambam, Yira, you will see, Sheyesh liyashev kol zeh b'pshitus, that is a very simple way of answering this kasha and understanding this halacha. Shenokat loshen zeh mishum ad b'sayim sham b'soif dvarav b'halacha yud. If you want to understand this halacha, you have to go to the source, to the Rambam. You have to see what the Rambam writes in halacha tes, and then what the Rambam writes in halacha yud. In halacha yud, the Rambam writes straight out, Ta'afilu im hasakin gedolim umaleim kleis chuchis she'i efshir lahanichad sheyiplu. Let's say the muktzah items that are on top of the animal are delicate muktzah items. They're glass test tubes that bloodletters used to use. So these are very delicate. They're completely muktzah. Now, in that case, you can't push the load off the animal with your head. You know why? Because it's going to fall to the floor and they're all going to break. And it's going to be a hefsid merubah. So in that case, the yishtabru, they're going to break. Says the Rambam over there, Afilu hachi lo yanichem sham ala behema. You still can't leave them on the behema. Why? Because it's tsar balakayim. So what do? Uparik oisam benachas mishum tsar balakayim. You have to go unload them gently, fragile, handled with care, using your hands. V'alzeh kol al b'tchila b'din tes. That's why the Rambam in Halacha Tes says, the b'chol gavni tzarech lifroik me'al ha'behema hainu afilu prika mamish mishum tsar balakayim. What the Rambam says in Halacha Tes is the requirements of tsar balakayim. The Doraisa requirement to alleviate the suffering of the animal dictates that no matter what, you're going to have to unload the animal. Even if you need to handle the muktzah b'yadayim mamish, you're going to have to unload the animal. And then later on in Halacha Yud, the Rambam elaborates on it and says, Sheyesh kama pratim bazeh. But there's a lot of details to this halacha. If there's a way to unload the animal without doing it b'yadayim mamish, without handling the muktzah mamish with your hands, then you're not allowed to handle it with your hands, then you have to go use your head. So now, at the end of the day, when we look back at the Mechaber, now we understand what the Mechaber is saying here. The Mechaber is saying like this. The Mechaber is saying, Umitam zeh, because of the requirements of Tzar Baalei Chayim, Parkin Masui She'aleha, you're allowed to unload muktzah items from an animal that is suffering under its load. Now that heter is a flat-out heter. You're even allowed to unload the animal by handling the muktzah items with your hands, if you must. If it's not practicable to do it any other way, then you're allowed to do it with your hands. But if it is practicable to do it in a less usser way, Ketzad Oisa, says the Mechaber, what should you do if you can? If it's practicable, what should you do? If you could use tiltal haguf, if you could manipulate the muktzah items using your body, which is a mutter way of using muktzah, do it that way. But if you can't, Tzar Baalei Chayim dictates that you do it even with your hands. Okay. Now, finally, we come to the Ramah, which is going to bring us back to what we discussed in the beginning of the Sif. So again, in the beginning of the Sif, we said you're not allowed to ride an animal. Why can't you ride an animal? Because of Gzeira, we're concerned, Shema Yachta Gzmoira, you might come to break a branch off a tree, which would be an Issa Daraisa, a told of the Av Malacha of Kaitzer. So therefore, you're not allowed to ride an animal. You're also not allowed to hang on an animal. The Chazal extended the Isser that you're not allowed to even use the side of the animal, even though that's not the Iker Tashmish of a behema. The Iker way you use an animal is not by leaning on its side, it's by climbing up on its back. But the Chazal even answered to be Mishtamish B'tzida, but Tzidate Studin, twice removed, to use the side of something that's leaning on the side of the animal, that Chazal were matir. We saw in the Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah is bringing a Magen Avram, who's medayik in the Lashon of the Ran, who says, yes, you could use the side of something that's leaning on the side of the animal, but you cannot use the top of something that's using the side of the animal. The Mishnah Berurah, again quoting the Magen Avram, said, where could you see this? In the Ramah. Let's see the Ramah. Says the Ramah Hagah, Va'aser leishev al karain, you're not allowed to sit in a wagon. She'eina Yehudi manhigoi b'Shabbos. That an Eina Yehudi, a non-Jew, is, making the wagon go. So you have a wagon, it's hitched to the animal. You're not driving it. You wouldn't be allowed to drive it. For you to drive it would be an Issa Daraisa. You're not allowed to drive it. But there's a guy that's driving it. But you're just sitting in the wagon. Are you allowed to sit in the wagon? Well, l'chayra, you would think that there's a good reason to be matir sitting in the wagon. The wagon is hitched to the side of the animal. That's tzidei habehema. You are sitting in the wagon. So l'chayra, that's tzidei tzadin. Right? Says the Ramah, no. Also, leishev al karan she'eina Yehudi manhiga b'Shabbos. Why? Mishum she'mishtamish b'behema, because that's called being mishtamish b'behema. Gam shelo yachta gzmoira. Also, by you sitting in the wagon, there's room for the Iker Gzeira that you might break off a branch to use it as a switch to make the animal go. Because when you're sitting in the wagon, you want the animal to pull you. So the Ramah says there's two problems here. Problem number one is that this is called being mishtamish b'behema. Now let's take problem number two is that, listen, the original Gzeira Shem Yachtach Zemora seems to apply very much if you're sitting in a wagon and you want to move. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Oiskan Samachvav. First, Mishnah Berurah makes an easy point. She'eina Yehudi manhigoi. The Ramah says you could sit in a wagon that's being driven by an Eina Yehudi. Points out the Mishnah Berurah, Dim Yisrael ba'atzmai manhigoi. If the Yid is driving the animal, yesh balavachi isser Torah mishum mechamer. That would be the isser daraisa of goading an animal to move on Shabbos is an Issa Daraisa. So certainly the Yid can't be the manhig. The Yid can't be the nahag. He can't be the driver of the wagon. That would be an Issa Daraisa. So says the Ramah, it's talking about the non-Jewish driver, but still you're not allowed to sit in the wagon. The Ramah says that's called being mishtamish bebehema. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, why is this called being mishtamish bebehema? Says the Mishnah Berurah, you might think, v'loy nikrat tzidei tzadin. You might think that this is the heter of tzidei tzadin. Mipnei, why would you think it's tzidei tzadin? Mipnei sh'argala mechuberes b'tzidei abehema. The wagon is hitched what? Not to the top of the animal. The wagon is hitched, so to speak, to the sides of the animal. And you are in the wagon. So l'chayr it's tzidei tzadin. It's twice removed. You're in the wagon, which is hitched to the side of the animal. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, the Ramah is telling you don't say that. Why? Keven shu mishtamish agabe ha'agala. Because you aren't standing outside the wagon and leaning on the wagon. If you were leaning on the wagon, so then you're leaning on the side of something that is connected to the side of the animal. That's tzidei tzadin, but that's not what you're doing. You are on top of the wagon. You're in the wagon. That's called using the sides of the animal. The chamal was sifkat and samach gimel, like I told you above, in sifkat and samach gimel. And if you take a look in Sharetzion, Ois Cotton and Tes, Magen Avram b'sifkat and ches. He's taking this from the Magen Avram in Siv Cotton Ches. And the Magen Avram is pulling it from Aran. The Gamle Hishtamish, now he just makes one more point here in the Mishnah Berurah. The Gamle Hishtamish al daf hayoytze chutz la'agola me'achareh gam ken aser. Let's say on the back of the wagon there's a step, and you want to stand on the step. That's also aser for the same reason. V'loy mikrei tzidei tzadin. That's also not called tzidei tzadin. The chiddush that the Mishnah Berurah is saying is you might think that that's even more tzidei tzadin, because maybe that step that's sticking out on the side of the wagon, maybe that's called that I'm using the side of the wagon. No, that's also called on top of the wagon. The whole wagon is one keli. If you're on the wagon, I don't care where you are on the wagon. I don't care if you're standing on the running boards of the wagon. That's called being on top of the wagon. So you're using the top of something that's using the side of the animal. Now, after looking at the Magen Avram, after looking at the Ran, after looking at the Prima Godim, after looking at the Mishnah Berurah, the Pir Halachas, it sounds to me that what's at work over here is like this. Chazal went ahead and they made a gzeira that you're not allowed to make use of an animal because we're afraid gzeira shem yachtak zmeira, you might come to cut a branch off a tree. So you're not allowed to ride an animal. Not only are you not allowed to ride an animal, you can't hang on an animal. That's also called the ikar tashmish of an animal. You're putting all your weight on the animal. That's like riding the animal. That's awesome. How about using the side of the animal? Using the side of the animal is not the ikar tashmish of the behemoth. It's not the normal way to use an animal. But Chazal extended their isser. And they said that to lean on the animal is also awesome. Okay. How about if I have a ladder leaning on the animal and now I want to lean on the ladder? Oh, that's tzidei tzadin. That's twice removed. You're leaning on the side of something that is leaning on the side of the animal. That is mutter, Chazal said. Okay, now I want to go on top of something that's using the side of the animal. So let's say you have a folding table. And one leg, the leg that's far away from the animal, is open and resting on the ground. The folding leg that's close to the animal is closed. And the table is leaning somehow on the side of the animal. And you want to go up on top of the animal. That's not tzidei tzadin. That's you're going on top. Going on top is one level closer to going on top of the animal. The ikar isser is going on top of the animal. Using the side of the animal is also usser. Why? Because we assered using the side of the animal because we don't want you using the top of the animal. Tzidei tzadin, the side of something that's using the side, we were matir. Now that's double removed. First of all, you're using the side. Using the side was already a chiddush. Even the fact that you're not allowed to use the side of the animal is a chiddush. It's not the ikar tashmish of the behemoth. So that's already a chiddush, right? But we said that that's usher. Tzidate studin is twice removed. But to use the gav, to use the top of something that's using the side of the animal is one level closer, because you're using the top of the item that's using the side. You're not allowed to use the top of the animal. So you're not allowed to use the top of the animal. You're also not allowed to use the top of the thing that's using the side. For more than that, we would have to go deep into the sugya, not what we do here, and it's not within the scope of what we do. Let's move along to Sifyud Tes, 3 lines off the bottom. Says the Mechaber. If you had an animal that fell into a waterway, an amasamayim is like a stream. So the animal somehow fell into this stream. Okay. Says the Mechaber. Im hamayim, and this comes from a brisa in Masechta Shabbos. Im hamayim amukim, if the water is deep. Umipnei kach einu yochel lefarnasam b'mekoymam. You have a problem. The animal is stuck in the water, and the animal can't get itself out of the water. So it says the Mechaber like this: if the water is deep, umipnei kach, and because of the depth of the water, eino yochel lefarnasam b'mekoymam, you cannot take care of the animal where it is. Maybe there's a way that you can get food to the animal, but the animal is suffering like anything, and the animal might die. It's in the water, it can't get out, the animal is in great distress, so eino yochel lefarnasam, you cannot sustain the animal, b'mekoymam, where it is. So the animal is at risk where it is, in the water. So then the Mechaber gives you a eitzah. It's an eitzah from the brisa. Maybe karimuksasos, you could bring mattresses and quilts and pillows and cushions. V'noisin tachtel, you could take a mattress, put a mattress into the stream, so that the animal could climb up on the mattress and get itself out of the water. So what you're trying to do is, you're trying to give the animal a ramp. You're trying to give the animal something that it could climb up on and get itself on the water. Now the words on the Mechaber is noisin tachtel. You could put it under the animal. You can't put it under the animal, because you're not allowed to lift up the animal and put it under the animal. Noisin tachtel over here means you could put the mattress into the water next to the animal so that the animal could climb up on it. That's what it means. Now, what's the big chiddush over here? Explains the Mechaber. Even though by doing this, you know what you're doing? You're taking a mattress. A mattress is something which is not muktzah. What's the opposite of a muktzah? Muchan. It's prepared. A mattress is something that is prepared for Shabbos use. You can go to sleep on it. You can take a nap on it. It's completely not muktzah. But by taking a mattress and putting it in a stream and getting it soaking wet and allowing an animal to climb up on it, now what you're doing is you're taking something which was muchan, which was not muktzah at all, it was ready for Shabbos use, and you're ruining it. You're turning it into something that will not be able to be used for Shabbos anymore. Once it's soaking wet, it has no Shabbos use. Certainly once the animal goes on it, it no longer has a Shabbos use. Now the problem of mevatel kli mehechanoi, we've spoken about it before. One of the basic problems of mevatel kli mehechanoi is it's kind of like breaking a keli. You're not allowed to break a keli on Shabbos, when essentially over here you broke a keli, because you had something, a mattress, that was perfectly usable on Shabbos, and now you're turning it into something which is no longer usable on Shabbos. So it's like you're breaking it. Another pshat is it's like being mechabered. It's like building it into the ground, because again it has no use. You can't even move it. Once the animal goes on it, that's it. It's done. So mavatel kli mehechanoi is an issa d'Rabbanan. But what are we saying over here? Tzar balachayim is an issa d'Oraisa. The need to alleviate the suffering of the animal is a d'Oraisa. So you have an animal in distress. You have to alleviate the suffering of the animal. We're going to relax the issa d'Rabbanan of mavatel kli mehechanoi and tell you take the mattress, put it in the stream, let the animal climb up on it. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut in Samiches. Im hamayim amukim, if the water is deep. Dim ein amukim, if the water is not deep. The yachal afarnasa b'mekayim shaloi tamus, If you could sustain the animal where it is and it won't die, it's not at risk. Then we're not going to be matter the Yisr Rabbanon of Bittul Kli Me'echanoi. Why should we? Maybe doesn't have to be mattresses and pillows and blankets. It could be a folding table. There's an added chiddush to karmuk sasais. After you stick a mattress in the stream, even if it takes 5 minutes for the animal to climb up and get out of the water, and now you could schlep the mattress out of the stream, it is still batel mehechanoi for the rest of Shabbos because it's soaking wet. Folding table is less of a chiddush because, okay, the animal will climb up, then you'll pull it out, now it's usable again. But not a mattress. The mattress, once you put it in there, that's it. It's done for the rest of Shabbos. So if you hachi mutter, does it tzar balachayim do the raisa? Mimad is here at term. Mrs. Prikas Hamasim Alabama. The dachi is a bittul kli me'echana shurak midrabanan. Shagazir shalalavato b'Shabbos kli mimashi muchenes. So again, the daraisa of tzar balachayim is making us relax the Yisr of bittul kli me'echana. The words of the Mechaber were v'noisid tachtel. You're going to put the karmik sasais under the animal. Says the Mishnah Berurah, also lahaloisa biyadayim. You're not allowed to pick up the animal and drag it out of the water, or pick up the animal and put the mattress underneath it. The chol balachayim he muktzah, because the animal is muktzah. Now, you'll say, I don't understand. The animal is muktzah. What's muktzah? And this is the Rabbanon. What's tzar balachayim? It's a deraisa. You're telling me bittul kli me'echanoi is an Issa D'Rabbanan, but we're relaxing the Issa D'Rabbanan of Bittul Kli Me'echanoi in order to allow you to alleviate the suffering of the animal, which is a requirement d'Oraisa. So what's the difference between the Issa D'Rabbanan of Bittul Kli Me'echanoi and the Issa D'Rabbanan of Muktzah? Why don't we just relax the Issa of Muktzah and tell you pull the behema, which is Muktzah, out of the water in order to solve the problem with Tzar Balachayim? They're both D'Rabbanans. How come this one we're being matter and this one we're not being matter? Says the Mishnah Berurah, a fascinating thing, and he brings it from the Magen Avram. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even though there's a derais of tzar balachayim, also, it's still also to take the animal, which is muktzah, and pick it up b'yadayim. Why? What's the difference? De'en lanu ledamois, we cannot compare gzeres chachamim zelozeh. This is coming from a brisa. This is coming from the words of Tanoim, brought down in the Gemara in Shabbos. If the Tana tells us that we could be matir bittul kli mehechanoi, but he didn't tell us we could relax the Yisr of Muktzah. We can't just turn around and say, okay, this is an Isra Rabbanan, that's an Isra Rabbanan, so if we could relax this, we could relax that. No. And he brings this from the Magen Avram, but then he says, Sheken muchach me Rambam. But there's a clear riot to this from the words of the Rambam, Ayin in the Rambam, Perek Chaf Hei, Halacha Chavav. Let's just finish this Mishnah Berurah. V'ayin bel Yerabah shehevi diyesh paiskim shemakilim afla haloisa b'yadayim im efshar yidei karmuk sasais. But there are paiskim that say that if there's no other way to get the animal out of the water, then yes, you could even do it with your hands. And we will relax the Yisr Muktzah also, if there's no other way to do it. To have a non-Jew get the animal out of the water is zichamutter, and that would be preferable even to putting the mattress in the water to let it climb up. We'll stop over here. We'll continue next time with Sivchaf. Thank you so much for... Oh, wait. There's just one quick, just a Ramah here. On the bottom line of Tzadik Vav and Beis, Din Kerud Behema B'Shabbos, the halacha of combing an animal on Shabbos, K'moy B'Yom is Aser on Shabbos, the same way it's Aser on Yom Tov. V'ayin L'Kaman Sim Tov Kov Chav Gimel Sif Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. This list of Limud HaTorah should be banging against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's Refuas Yeshuduchim Parnasa to all those in need. We should be Zocher to see the BS Gal Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.